Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to everyone. To the Shafi'i Fiqh live question and answers. So this is an opportunity for anyone to ask questions that they may have that may relate to them or others, or anything that, if something out of curiosity or interest. And I will try my best to answer in accordance to the Shafi'i Madhab. So please do, if you have any questions, you may post them, and inshallah we'll try and get through as much as we can. If there's anything that I can hopefully answer, inshallah, I'll try my best to answer in line with the Shafi'i school of thought. And if there's something that I cannot, then I will try my best to review and hopefully, inshallah, bring an answer for the next sessions, bi'idhnillah. So if you have any questions, please do post them, and inshallah, they will appear to me in due time, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, Shaykh. We've had some questions from our social media platforms.
Okay.
So we'll start with those, inshallah. And then, meanwhile, if any of the viewers want to ask any additional questions, like you mentioned, they can ask us in the live chat, and we'll get through them, inshallah.
Perfect, Sayyidi.
Okay, great. Shaykh. So the first question we had, let me just pull it up, inshallah. I think a sister asked, how should women sit during Salah? And then she also asked, can women from other madhab follow this ruling?
Okay, so women sitting in Salah, I'm assuming the woman is speaking about the sitting positions in prayer, not in a particular position where you're not supposed to be sitting, where if you're standing, but it's if someone has a reason to pray sitting down. So I'm assuming that this question is referring to the positions that normally in prayer you sit, such as for when you do the tashahhud, tahiyatu lillah, when you're sitting between the two sajdas, and the final tashahhud before you give salam. So in those positions in the Shafi'i school, the woman sits in similar, as in there's two forms of positions that we have. We call an iftirash and we call a tawarruk position. I'll explain what these Arabic terms mean. An iftirash position is where the woman, and this is for man and woman, where you're sitting, your left buttock is sitting on your left foot, and your right buttock is next to your erect right foot. So your right foot is that, and your buttock is right next to it. Okay, now that and you're basically sitting in that position with your back straight, etc., and your hands would be fingers together like this, and the fingers would be touching the top of your knees, not over your knees like that curl, but it'll just be over it like that, on the top of your knees, at the bottom of the thigh. So basically, that's the position that you generally be sitting for when you're sitting between the two sajdas. And if you have a tashahhud, which is after two units of prayer, you get up to do a third or fourth rak'ah. Okay, so that's the position you normally would be sitting. The difference between the man and the woman here is that the woman would be a lot more closed up, in the sense that her thighs would be close together and her arms would also be, elbows would be in. Okay, unlike the man wouldn't have to have his thighs together. It'd be a little bit more, just more relaxed, open, and his elbows would also be in. That man's elbows wouldn't be completely in, but they'll be just a bit more relaxed in, whilst the woman, it'll be a lot more in. And then the final position is called the tawarruk position. This is the position where it's the final sitting before you give salam in the Shafi'i Madhab, whereby the position is you'll be sitting on your left buttock on the ground, and then your right foot would basically be erect. So if you imagine someone sitting with their left buttock on the ground, right foot is erect, okay, and therefore there'll be a gap between the shin, at the shin area. Your left foot would basically go under that shin, okay, and then you basically be leaning on your left hand side and up. So that's the two sitting positions we have in the Shafi'i school. The other part of the question was, can somebody follow this sitting from another madhab? As long as if there's a reason to follow this, then absolutely fine. As long as that madhab, the person follows the protocols in terms of that are aligned to following another madhab from their own, moving from their own madhab.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh.
Well, yeah.
Again, just to remind the viewers, they can ask their questions in the live chat should they have any. The other question that we had emailed in was from a brother who asked, when does heavy filth become excused in the Shafi'i school? Does it ever become excused, or does one have to make tawfiq to another madhab? Can you provide examples of the case when it becomes excused?
Okay, inshallah, very good question. So heavy filth, first to define heavy filth. In the Shafi'i school, heavy filth is of two categories, which is the dog and the pig. Everything else is not considered to be heavy filth in the Shafi'i school. So anything to do with the dog and the pig is considered to be heavy filth. The reason why it's called heavy is because anything that comes into contact with a dog or a pig, it requires a much more severe or more difficult way of cleaning. This is why it's called heavy filth. We call in Arabic mughallada, an-najasatu mughallada. So the question with regards to are they ever excused? Yes, they can be excused. When in certain circumstances, when you have an absolute necessity, we talk about necessity, not need. So, for instance, if a person, for example, let's give an example. I mean, I can't a practical example in surgery. What comes to mind now is if somebody, for example, needs to have a heart transplant, okay, and the person doesn't have, there's no other alternative except for them to have a pig's heart, okay, and there's no halal alternative, anything like that. In this situation, the pig's heart is najis, but because of the necessity that has come about, it's allowed for that transplant to take place, and that najasa would be excused in that way. As for example, the other thing also to bear in mind in terms of najasa, in terms of filth, there would not be a transfer of filth unless there is a moist barrier between two things come into contact. So, for example, this is something to bear in mind. If, for instance, somebody touches a dog, okay, someone pats a dog, if the dog's, wherever you've patted the dog and your hand, none of them are moist, then your patting of the dog the najasa hasn't transferred to your hand. Whether you see anything or not, even if you see a piece of hair, you just rub it off and it'll be fine. There's no transfer of najasa. But the moment that there is a moist barrier, either the dog, the place you've patted the dog, or your hand is moist, one of those two places, then the najasa has transferred, whether or not you see anything. And then you'd have to go through the whole process, which makes it a lot more difficult. Yeah, which makes it a lot more difficult in that situation. So that was an example of where dog and pig can be excused. And a reasoning behind it. In terms of following another madhab, I mean, as I've noticed now, this is the second time it's popped up, this question. I mean, inshallah, maybe there'll be another time we can discuss this in more detail, but I think there's already has been some detail with regards to this on Islam Answers. So please refer to any of the answers that have already been given there. And inshallah, maybe there'll be a time we can go into a lot more detail with regards to following another madhab. But what's more important is for a person to make sure that if they do decide to transfer and look to another madhab, then they need to ensure they follow the protocols of the madhab that they originally follow regarding going to another madhab.
Yes, Sheikh, as you mentioned, we do have an answer on Islam Answers regarding this, so please do check that, inshallah. Okay, Sheikh, we'll take the next question, which is, I've seen in translation of Al-Maqasid that only alcohol that results in fermentation is najis. Does this have any basis in the Shafi'i Madhab?
Translation of Al-Maqasid, okay, that only alcohol that is a result of fermentation is najis. Does this have any basis in the Shafi'i Madhab? So the point of alcohol here is, alcohol, as we know, is quite a broad term in the chemical world. What we are concerned about in the Shafi'i school, the madhab, is number one, regardless of what it's called, the name, alcohol, non-alcohol, what we're concerned about is two things. Is this liquid? Is this item a liquid? Number two, is it an intoxicant? Those are the two important things. Okay. Now, when it says as a result of fermentation, is that it's najis, that's obviously when it goes through the process of fermentation, this is where it all comes about. So the most important thing that we care about, as I've mentioned in the Shafi'i school, is two important things, regardless of the process. Number one, is it a liquid? Number two, is it an intoxicant? If it carries these two properties, then that liquid is najis, is filthy. Okay. So the question about does it have any basis? Yes, it does have a basis in the sense that the scholars are talking about here. The particular point they're mentioning here is the issue of ethanol. Okay, so ethanol is an example of a liquid intoxicant. Okay, regardless of whether it intoxicates you or not. So this is quite important. That I'm going into a little bit more detail as it is, but just to the question that bears in mind, whether or not that liquid intoxicates you or not. If it's a liquid and it has these two qualities, a liquid and intoxicant, then it's impure in the Shafi'i school. Okay, so it does have a basis, and the issue of fermentations, the basis of that is because that's ethanol. That's an example of how ethanol comes about, which is najis in the Shafi'i school.
Okay, the next question, Shaykh, is I've heard in the Shafi'i school that gelatin, which comes from an animal which wasn't slaughtered Islamically, is permissible to eat.
Gelatin that comes from an animal which wasn't slaughtered Islamically is permissible to eat. No, this is incorrect. In the Shafi'i school, gelatin, if it comes from an animal that has been slaughtered Islamically, is permitted to eat. If it comes from an animal that is not been slaughtered Islamically, or is not permitted to be eaten, whether it's regardless of its form of slaughter, then it's not permissible to take, because this is a form of the only way this is based on something called istihala, and the way istihala means a transformation. In the Shafi'i school, the madhab is quite rigid with regards to this issue of transformation. And transformation example of that would be, for example, when you get the hide of an animal other than dog and pig, and then which hasn't been slaughtered Islamically, okay, so whatever that might be, and you tan it, get rid of the hairs, and you have leather. That is a transformation. When wine turns into vinegar, it's a full-on transformation. But the issue of gelatin, which comes from bone marrow, okay, if it's from the animal, then no, this is not a valid transformation in the Shafi'i school. We have this mentioned in our books, where they mention, for example, if a pig turns into salt, it's not considered to be a transformation. Okay, and gelatin is another example of which would not be valid as a transformation. Therefore, gelatin that does not come from a halal source is not edible in the Shafi'i school and not be ingested.
The next question, Shaykh, is Assalamu alaikum. In the Shafi'i Madhab, what are the rulings for atoning for missed or broken compulsory fast, both accidental and deliberate?
Okay, so here we have a different, depending on, it's wa alaikum salam firstly. If we're talking about Ramadan, it depends upon what has caused it to break, because there can be some details with regards to that. In general, if someone has broken a fast, an obligatory fast we're talking about here, because it's a compulsory fast, if it's done deliberately, okay, now the term accidental is quite vague, but I'm assuming either accidental means forgetfully. So, and I'll explain this in more detail. So if someone breaks a fast deliberately, okay, which is the fast of Ramadan or a fast that they vowed to do, okay, then what is upon them is the following, is that firstly, they must make tawbah, okay, they must repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and secondly, they sincerely, and follow the conditions of tawbah with that, and secondly, they must make up the fast before the following year comes about, okay, if it's for Ramadan fast, prior to the following year, because if they do not do it prior to that, then it's an issue after that. But they must make up the fast before that year. As for an accidental, or someone who breaks a fast forgetfully, so forgetfully, if someone eats something and they forgot, and they weren't aware they were eating, and they ate, or they were fasting, they ate something, they ingested it, and then they remembered, oh, I was fasting, this does not break in the Shafi'i school. Okay, so there's no need to make up a fast like this. If we're talking about accidental, in the sense that, let's say somebody was brushing their teeth and they knew they were fasting and they put some water in their mouth. Now, they shouldn't have put water in their mouth in the first place, because there's no need to put water in your mouth at that moment in time. And then accidentally some water fell down to the back of their throat and they swallowed it. So there's a difference between forgetfully and accidentally. That person would have to make up the fast as well. Okay. As I said, there is more detail with regards to why someone may have broken it. So if someone's if they broke it, God forbid, but through having relations with one spouse, or if it's a pregnant lady, a breastfeeding lady, then rules will differ with regards to them. But I'm assuming this question is not talking about that. If it is, then please add more detail to your question so that I explain it more, inshallah.
Okay, the next question is, what is the ruling on masturbation?
The default ruling is that one is not allowed to take part in this practice in the Shafi'i school. It's not allowed. And I believe this is across all the other schools. Well, but I'm not going to comment on the other schools. But in the Shafi'i school, as a default, one is not allowed to take part in an action like this. The only time that one may do so is with one's own spouse. Okay. Otherwise, this action, as in even masturbation, is not allowed. But it's relations with one spouse. But on this practice alone by default is not allowed. If there are certain exceptional circumstances, then these are obviously rare occurrences that need to be dealt with differently. Okay, but as a default, it's not allowed. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, the next question is, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. In the Hanafi Madhab, if you exited your Salah early thinking you were in the fourth rak'ah, when in reality you were in the third rak'ah, as long as you don't speak to anyone or eat, etc., you can return to your Salah and finish the fourth rak'ah. Is there something similar in the Shafi'i Madhab?
So, can I just have a look at that question?
Sure, sure. Is that
if you exited your Salah early, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you exited your Salah early thinking you were in the fourth rak'ah, okay, when in reality you were in the third rak'ah, as long as you don't speak to anyone or eat, you can return to your Salah and finish the fourth rak'ah. Okay, so in the Shafi'i school, so this is an example here. We have somebody who's finished their prayer. Now they finished their prayer thinking they've prayed 4, but in reality they only prayed 3. Now they finished their prayer not knowing that. If someone finished a prayer knowing that, then the prayer is invalid. Okay, so that's one thing, because someone has then done something deliberately which they're not supposed to do. But this person has finished their prayer, not knowing. They've finished their prayer and they've got on with other things. Now, in the Shafi'i school, if a long period of time has passed, okay, so this is what we call customary, that you'd be considered to be a long period of time, then you'd have to go back and make up your prayer, okay? Or if you've done too many actions, then you'd have to go back and make up your prayer as well. Or if you've turned your back to the Qibla, then you'd have to make up your prayer. But if you finished a prayer, and let's say you're still sitting, you haven't done anything, so you said Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and 10, 15 seconds pass, and you haven't moved, or so all you're doing is your dhikr after prayer, and then you remembered, oh, I didn't. Now, if you're doubtful, you don't go back into the prayer. But if you're certain that, no, I didn't pray 4 rak'ahs, okay, then you've got one more to do, then you go back into the prayer and carry on from where you were. Wallahu a'lam.
There's two that are kind of similar, so I'll link them together, inshallah. First one is, I've heard that Imam Ghazali allowed musical instruments in certain situations. Is this true? And is it a strong position in the madhab? And a similar one which says, what is the ruling of music in the Shafi'i madhab?
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm glad that this question has come up. This has been something that has been going around quite a lot about Imam Ghazali, and may Allah have mercy upon him, and with regards to his stance on musical instruments. So, Imam Ghazali, in his book Al-Ihya and his other books that's written in particular with the Shafi'i Madhab, namely Al-Basit, Al-Wasit, and Al-Wajiz, okay, in all of those books, I haven't read the Wasit is actually available. The Basit is available in manuscript form, and Al-Wajiz it's available as well. But in all of them places, let me speak in particular with Ihya. Imam Ghazali only permitted what the Shafi'i Madhab already permitted. He did not permit anything beyond what the Shafi'i Madhab permitted. Some people have misunderstood this statement of Imam Ghazali because they've read Ihya, and when they've come to the chapter of musical instruments, Imam Ghazali is speaking about the benefits of music and music in general. And I don't recall him mentioning about the alat except before that, meaning the instruments. If the person just looked a few pages before that, when he spoke about the benefits, just look a few pages before that and look at what he speaks about with instruments, he is clearly mentioning at the instrument stage that what is permitted is everything is, what is permitted is only the duff in the Shafi'i school. The duff is the only thing permitted, and there's a difference of opinion with regards to the flute, where there's a difference between Imam Rafi'i and Imam Nawawi, and Imam Nawawi and Rafi'i differed on this, and Imam Nawawi said it's prohibited, and the madhab went with Imam and Nawawi on this position. So therefore, all other musical instruments apart from the duff is prohibited in the Shafi'i school. And Imam Ghazali, he basically just mentioned the same stance as I've just mentioned here. Then he went and spoke about music. Now, when he's speaking about music, in light of that, the benefits of that, he's talking about it from this angle. Meaning, when he says music is allowed, he's not saying music is allowed in its general, in the general sense. He's talking about music and if you're talking about instruments, with those instruments that he mentioned before. Okay, not that he's permitting it in general. So this is very important because many people have misunderstood the statement of Imam al-Ghazali. Okay, so first and foremost, Imam Ghazali has permitted musical instruments in line with what the Shafi'i Madhab has already permitted anyway, which is the only musical instruments that are permitted in the Shafi'i school is a duff, okay, as in like a drum. And the drum is all drums are permitted except for one particular drum, which is not allowed in the Shafi'i school. It's the drum that has a wide head or base, a wide drum, okay, and a narrow stem. If any drum has a very narrow stem and a wide head, this one's not permitted. Otherwise, every other drum is permitted. And as I mentioned, the flute, meaning stringed instruments, are not permitted. The flute, there's a difference of opinion, and the strongest position, and upon its fatwa, is that the flute is also prohibited in the Shafi'i school. Okay, so Imam Ghazali says exactly what the madhab has already said. As with regards to the other question, I think it was about music, the ruling of music. Now, music there, we have to understand. I'm going to understand the term music in light of the context we live in today. Okay, in the 21st century, music we have to understand music as a culture, music in terms of the lyrics, and music in terms of the digitization, and music in terms of the instruments. So instruments, I've just mentioned the ruling with regards to instruments on its own. With regards to lyrics, obviously what is permitted to listen to speak, hear is permitted. Anything that there's any form of profanity or anything like that, that is not normally would not be allowed to be listened to, you wouldn't listen to either. If there's any praising of any prohibited things or forbidden things, then it's again not allowed to be listened to. Cultures, the culture of it, we have to bear in mind that if in terms of imitating particular individuals, this is also another part that comes with it. If you end up imitating or intend to imitate particular individuals, that it's haram. Okay, it's not allowed. As for digital music, then here we have a slight issue that generally we say that and Allahu alam, the copy or the sound, okay, it does not take the actual ruling of the instrument itself. Okay, there's a difference here. So if there is a sound that is within a recorded device, okay, that doesn't take the same ruling as the instrument. Now, does that mean I'm saying that listening to music is allowed? Absolutely not, because there are a lot more details involved within that, as I mentioned, a culture, etc. So I've hopefully covered music in a lot more of a wider scale in that sense. But the most important thing is that I would like to mention here is want to be very careful with regards to the culture that surrounds music in and of itself.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. That's a very thorough and clear answer. Okay. Next question we have is it permissible to play video games where one commits acts that are haram in real life, for example, killing or stealing?
Video games in general in the Shafi'i school, the only games that are permitted are games, because the most important thing is the issue of not wasting time. And the only form of game that has been permitted is the game that it'll bring together families, okay, children, parents, etc. As long as the game doesn't involve the use of a dice, and there is no form of gambling, regardless if there is a dice or not. If there is a dice, regardless of whether it's gambling or not, it's not allowed. If the game is built upon a form of chance, it's also not allowed. Okay, and the only game basically the only game is allowed is the game that will assist one in that, if there was to be war, that would help them in war. So the things that we're talking about here is using one's time in, for example, martial arts. Okay, martial arts would be something beneficial. Anything like martial arts like that would be something beneficial. Video games, like I said, if that video game will benefit someone, if there was to be a war in some way, so I don't know how that might help them strategically or something, there may be some strategic way of dealing with things, then it would be allowed. If there's anything haram that is taking place, and again, killing or stealing, you're not really killing someone, you're stealing. But I know what the person is saying by this question is the issue of the culture surrounding it, and one needs to be very careful with regards to this issue of tarbiyah and bringing up children, etc. But that's a different issue. But I'm talking about here, if that game benefits in a way such that it's going to help the person strategically, okay, with a war, or physically with a war, then it would be okay. But otherwise, other than that, across the board, games would only be allowed if it only helps with those two things: strategic and its benefit in war.
Okay, Sheikh, the next question from social media, so it won't be up, but the sister asks, do children of one sister become mahram to the children of the other sister if they breastfeed one another's children?
Yes, so if there's one sister, she's got children, and she breastfeeds the child at the time prior, that is breastfeeding can be done, and before a particular time, then that child becomes the breast mother. That other sister becomes the breast mother also of the child. Yes, but in the other way, they are still mahram, because it's the children's the mother of the children, her sister is their auntie anyway, so they're mahram, if I've understood the question correctly, Sayyidi.
I think they're asking the children, for example, the cousins, right? If there's a son.
Oh, so a sister has children,
yeah,
and another sister has children, and in terms of them together,
yes,
cousins.
If they breastfeed each other children.
So one sister breastfeeds their children, the other sister, yes, this would be they would become what do you call it, prohibited to marry across one another due to breastfeeding. Yes, there'll be nursing brothers and nursing sisters. Yes.
Okay, I think that's what it was. Okay, the next question, and I think we'll make this one the final one because we're only going to do half an hour. So the final question, Sheikh, is, Sheikh, based on your description of the rulings of the different types of music, European classical music would be allowed in the Shafi'i Fiqh?
I don't listen to any classical music, so I don't know. But I'm assuming this is, if I understand correctly, European classical music, if we're talking about the likes of those composers such as Mozart and Beethoven and these type of people, if you're listening to the instruments, it's not allowed at all. Okay, because they are using string instruments, piano, whatever, that you're not allowed to use them. But again, when I spoke about the issue of recorded music, then that's something completely different. Okay, so a European classical music that involves other than what I mentioned. Again, let me just mention this here. If the instruments are not, the only instrument that's allowed in the Shafi'i school is a drum, apart from one particular drum, which we call the kuba, narrow stem, wide head. Okay, if that drum's not allowed, every other drum is allowed, and there's a difference of opinion on the flute. Every other instrument is not allowed in the Shafi'i school. So I don't know if that fulfills European classical music, whereby they only use the drum, then that's good. If it doesn't, then there'll be a problem.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Sorry, I just realized I missed one.
No problem, Sayyidi.
I think this is to do with a question you answered earlier, but I'm not sure if you understand. I'm not sure I understand either.
The criterion doesn't have to do with fermentation. Yes, absolutely, Sayyidi. The question again is referring back to the issue of alcohol. It's not limited to that particular process. That process was mentioned in light of that creates this particular product, and this is haram. So no, if any liquid that, again, any substance that is a liquid and has intoxicating properties, regardless of how much it takes to intoxicate, that particular substance is najis, is filthy in the Shafi'i school, whether it has gone through fermentation or not.
Barakallahu feekum, Shaykh. Thank you so much for your time. Inshallah, we'll be back again, hopefully, if you have time, next month. And just to remind the viewers, we have another Q&A session for the Hanafi Madhab in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, they can check out the Islam Answers website, where we have more answers from Shaykh Jamili and Shaykh Nuruddin and other shuyukh. And obviously, if you have any questions, you can send them in via our platforms or email. And inshallah, we'll see them for next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.